we're very much about getting incentives aligned, because when you align incentives between two parties, things become magical, is why our pricing works.
Hi everyone, I'm joined today by Rik, the VP of Growth at RevenueCat. RevenueCat is a tool that I used to use back in the day, and it helps you with mobile subscriptions, which is really, really annoying and complicated. Rik talks about their unusual approach to sales, and he talks about why conferences and being in person has led to a huge amount of growth for them. I read this article that you'd written about, like, it's kind of a recruitment article in a sense, as you were trying to, I mean, it was, right? Like, you're trying to recruit people. And so you wrote
I call it a Trojan horse, right? Like, we dress it up as an article about how we do a thing, but secretly I'm just sneaking in a bunch of job openings.
I mean, more people should do that, because it hooked me. So I was like, you've written all about how RevenueCat's sales org works, and it's very interesting, and I think it's quite different and definitely not what most sales orgs are doing. So, and there's a lot of detail. So I kind of wanted to bring you on and ask you about this and hear how you do sales at RevenueCat.
I mean, in the article, I do sales, right? I put it in quotation marks.
Yeah.
Which I think is maybe even a little fair, because our sales team is not gold by doing sales, or like, that's not the measure of success, right? The mission for that team, and I can talk about what the team looks like in a little bit. The mission is to help people evaluate RevenueCat wherever they are, right? Or however they want to evaluate. Because RevenueCat is, sure, it's a developer tooling, but it's also like a platform used by marketers and product people, even support reps. Yeah. So evaluating RevenueCat could be a lot of things. It can be a developer that wants to poke around. It can be like a CEO that wants a business case presented. That team, and we as RevenueCat, we don't care how you want that to happen. We'll help you, right? That's the purpose of that team. Help you evaluate RevenueCat. And then if what you want to do is buy RevenueCat, we're going to help you buy RevenueCat. And it doesn't really matter how you do that, right? You want to swipe a credit card? Sure. You want to sign a contract? Sure. You want to sign a contract and pay it monthly? It's fine by us, right? However you want to buy, however you want to pay, it's our job to like meet you where you are rather than the other way around. Which is, I think, by itself is already like a little unusual.
You're not trying to force people into different boxes, I guess.
The easiest way to explain it is like in almost every single sales org, you have a quota, and that quota is how much like ACV or account value do you manage to close in a year. That's literally your job. And then what happens, and I've seen this happen in other, like, I've worked in dev tooling for a bit. I've seen this happen in other companies. What happens is that the developer that wants to evaluate by themselves, right? They just want to poke around in the product, and they're probably best off swiping a credit card and just getting going. Because the sales org is incentivized to get as many contracts signed for as much money as possible, what they're going to do is they're going to like swoop in, and they're going to like try and get you onto a contract that you don't need or don't want. And just by like incentivizing your people differently, and then making it very, very clear what the goal of the sales organization is, you hopefully prevent that. And, you know, that's a trade-off, because what will happen is you'll sign fewer contracts, but the contract you sign will be better and you'll have happier customers overall.
Scaling DevTools is sponsored by WorkOS. If things start going well, some of your customers are going to start asking for enterprise features. Things like SSO, skim provisioning, role-based access control. You could spend ages tearing your hair out building these things yourself, or you could use WorkOS. Will, what do you guys do?
My name is Will Stewart, co-founder and CEO of Northlink. We're a self-service developer platform, and we help teams deploy their most critical workloads into their VPC.
And you guys use WorkOS?
We use WorkOS for our SAML and OIDC integrations. It's a pretty exceptional product. It makes everything regarding authentication pretty seamless, and it's been instrumental for us to onboard our enterprise customers much faster. Yeah, it's a great product.
WorkOS helps your dev tool start selling to enterprises much faster, and they're trusted by dev tools like Cursor, Fal, and Vercel. If you use their user management auth, you can get your first 1 million monthly active users completely free. And so salespeople do not have targets, do not make commission.
They have targets. The targets are just not tied to getting a signed contract. Because that's the that's the misalignment of incentives, right? And we're very much about getting incentives aligned, because when you align incentives between two parties, things become magical. It's why our pricing works, right? It's actually the same rationale, where if we just charge you for the money you make, then us helping you make more money makes you more money, and then we make more money, and then you get this nice little synergy. And then the sales org is gold on getting people to evaluate RevenueCat successfully, and then using it in whatever way makes sense for them.
Interesting. So it's more like, because I feel like the devil will be the details for this. I can imagine so people, if say someone signed up and had a call with me, and then I was like, just go swipe your credit card, play around whenever you're ready, do that.
Yeah, we track that.
That would be accrued to me essentially, because I've been helpful to them.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. And then if they went on to become massive deal, it's great. That's
and similarly, when people do sign contracts, because it's in the article, but real quick for people that haven't read it, first read it, and then second, apply for a job, and then third, we have 2 sales engineers and actually somebody from our support org trialing as a sales engineer. So we have 2.5 sales engineers, and we have 1 strategic account manager. And then we're looking to hire a bunch more of those. And then there's me, and I kind of just hop in and do whatever. The strategic account manager and all the account managers we're looking to hire still, they're not just getting the customer on board or getting a contract signed whenever that's the best thing to do. They're actually responsible for that customer as long as they're on RevenueCat. So when a renewal happens, or conversations about expansions, or people want to negotiate prices or whatever, right? All of that's going to be the same rep throughout all of it, which means that, and again, you want to try and get the incentives to match up. If I sell somebody or I oversell somebody, then I'm actually on the hook for the conversation that happens afterwards. And I think by and large we hire well, so that's not a thing I would be worried about regardless. But it's just nice to be able to tell people that, the person that you signed that contract with is going to be the person you talk to again half a year from now or a year from now.
Yeah, and I think that it makes sense that just incentives do dictate behavior on a big scale, I guess, when, people, you can hire the best people, but if you stack the incentives towards them doing something, then they're going to do it, I think.
Yeah. And we talked about this off mic a little bit, but I was at other dev tool companies before, and also with this type of hybrid PLG or a product-led growth motion, where a lot of people just self-serve, but also you have some sold customers. And we made the horrible mistake of just actually at some point we decided to comp reps on new contracts, not even the value of the contract, but the amount of contracts. And what happened is that actually people successfully like swiping a credit card on self-serve slowly went down, and the number of contracts slowly went up. But the total amount of money we were making wasn't moving all that much. It was like, no, it didn't take us very long to figure out what was happening. But that's what happens, right? That's what happens.
Yeah. I think it's hard for a lot of developers to understand this, because the culture of development is so collaborative and so kind of, it's very like principled in like, in some ways, especially around like doing kind of like the quote unquote right thing. And not in like a, just like people care a lot about like the kind of the truth and stuff. And this is not, this sounds like I'm doing a massive knock, but like when I worked in sales, a lot of, there are like a number of people like in any bigger organization who are a lot more money driven than most people can probably imagine, I think.
Yeah.
Do you think this is fair? Like, and it's like, you can quite easily create a thing where like people really do compete just to like put numbers on the board, meet the incentive. It's like a game. And so if you stack that game in a certain way, people are going to play the game.
Yeah, sure. But there's like, regardless of like the ethics of operating that way, or it being like a long-term good for the business, it just doesn't work for most dev tool type companies. We talked before a little bit, again, off like, about the idea of the compelling event, right? Where if what you're selling is replacing something that a developer has already built themselves, right? So any type of infrastructure. I used to do this with like CI/CD, but for RevenueCat, it's monetization infrastructure. Actually, what it is doesn't really matter. You've already built this yourself, right? Or your teams built this. You've invested a lot of like blood, sweat, and tears in the thing. By and large, it's working. Then a company comes along and says, "I have a better thing for you." It's like, if it isn't broke, don't try to fix it, right? So by and large, it's very, very difficult to get people that already built something to replace that with something new. And then what you're looking for is a compelling event, and a compelling event is a reason why, even though I don't want to touch it, I'm going to touch it now. And first compelling event is something's broken. That's always a good one. So I don't want to replace my in-app monetization stack, but it doesn't work. Or I need to do something to my in-app monetization stack, but the person that built it left. That's always like a good one if you've built everything yourself. Those are the moments that you then come to like RevenueCat or whatever, and are open to having a conversation about those alternatives. But that companion event is like, we as RevenueCat don't control when your in-app monetization infrastructure breaks. What we can do is we can make sure that whenever that happens, you know who we are, you trust us, and you reach out. Those are the things we can do. And for that to work, you have to think really, really long term, because like your stuff's not going to break every month. Probably it's not going to break every year. Like, these are black swan events that happen once every 3 or 4 years, that there's like a compelling event and now I have to do something. So you're kind of conditioned as an org to talk to these big prospective customers year in, year out on very small things, be very, very consultative, right? Help them wherever you can, because then when the thing breaks, then they come in, then the time is right, and you switch stuff out. That requires a certain type of mentality, because it also means that if I'm that rep and I'm having a conversation with, in our case, a big app, that might not pay off until like 2 years or 3 years down the road. So if I'm like overly focused on closing the deal, getting the paper signed at any cost, then I'm not going to be able to maintain that relationship. And actually, when it matters, I'm not going to be able to close the deal.
Yeah, and I think you're also telling me about like this about speed and kind of training people to react to compelling events.
One of my day one tricks to hit the ground running in a place is to like figure out what these compelling events are and map them out properly. And then, because in RevenueCat, and actually in most places I've worked at, I run marketing and I run sales and I run customer success, and do a lot of stuff with the compelling events. So we build ginormous demand gen efforts around compelling events so that when they happen, we make sure that there's like a trail of breadcrumbs that leads you to RevenueCat. And like a very practical example is that if you're in mobile, Google and Apple do their very best to create compelling events for us by just changing stuff. And Google has the Play billing library, which is if you want to sell stuff on Android or on Google Play, to be precise, you need to implement the Google Play billing library. They release a new one every year, and they deprecate one every year, which means that whatever you've built, at the bare minimum, once every 2 years, you're going in and you're changing a bunch of stuff. And I think like 3 years ago, no, maybe 4 years ago, they launched Google Play Billing Library 5. So they went from 4 to 5 and completely changed how like the taxonomy of what a subscription is, right? And most of these versions are like minor changes. And then suddenly they were like, oh, we changed everything dramatically. And that was like a panic moment for a lot of apps. And actually when the panic set in was like a year later when they figured out that, hey, wait a minute, like the thing we're using is going to be deprecated in like a month. And everybody's used to these versions being like relatively minor. And it suddenly turned out that everything was going to break. And what we did and what we still do, and you can check this, if you Google the Google Play Billing Library version, like Google Play Billing Library version numbers, for the last couple of versions, after Google's content, I'm the first hit. Because as they are presenting about the Play Billing Library, I'm literally writing a blog post about if you're making the migration, this is what you need to know. Because then what we can see on our end is, hey, this app is looking in the Google Play Billing Library transition stuff, right? So they're thinking about that compelling event. Now's a good time to reach out and tell them that we can help out. And actually for Google Play Billing Library 5, that was such a huge change for most apps that we literally just, for a bunch of non-customers, hopped on calls with their engineering teams to help them move from Billing Library 4 to 5, not to RevenueCat, from 4 to 5, because we knew that a bunch of them were so late that the decision-making process in companies wasn't going to allow them to move to RevenueCat. We were like, okay, in service of the relationship, right, and to make sure that they know who we are, that they trust us, right, they value our expertise. We literally had calls with giant apps to help their team make the transition to Play Billing Library 5 rather than to RevenueCat. And a bunch of those apps since have, when another compelling event happened, come to us and then moved over.
That's amazing. I think our compelling event when we started using RevenueCat, when I worked at a mobile startup, was just trying. I think we were trying to implement billing. Like we were free for ages, and then we were like, okay, let's put in a paywall, and then we were like trying to ship it, and it was like I wasn't implementing it, but my colleague was, and it was like just way more complicated. And it was like the founders were really antsy to get it out fast, understandably. And it was like, can we use RevenueCat? If we can we just release like next week instead of like in a month or something?
Yeah.
Or something, because it was so complex, I remember.
Yeah, but that's honestly, at this point, I think we're closing in on 50% of new subscription apps worldwide launch with RevenueCat.
Really?
Yeah, no, it's bonkers. I was looking at the numbers today. 20% of all the money being made by subscription apps in the app stores goes through RevenueCat worldwide.
Really? Wow. And I'm guessing a lot of that is just in like some small amount of apps like that just hoover up like I guess like Spotify and stuff probably.
Well, it's also like we're in 30% of those apps, right? We're doing 20% of the revenue and we're 30% of the apps. So actually we skew a little under the average. Not so much because smaller apps use RevenueCat and bigger apps don't. It's because new apps use RevenueCat and it takes them a very, very long time to become big apps.
Yeah.
So that's like it's a matter of time. But we have this mention tracking stuff set up so that when people talk on Reddit or LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever, talk about RevenueCat, we pick that up. And it's really funny to see like how over the years those conversations have switched to people arguing why they're not choosing RevenueCat, right? Like you have to explain why you're not using RevenueCat, which is like, that's a pretty good position. It's a pretty good position to be in. But that's like net new apps. And when it's net new apps, somebody's building something new. The person that makes that decision is 99 times out of 100 is the developer. And the product sells itself. It is a little cheesy, but it's also kind of true, right? We're not actually helping them evaluate or even selling to them. 9 times out of 10, they'll just swipe a credit card. We literally have like top 100 grossing apps in the world that just swipe the credit card because that's how they got started.
Like if someone's getting started with a developer tool and they're looking at like marketing stuff, do you think from the experiences you've had with RevenueCat, like what would you be saying to people at the beginning of their kind of journey?
Go to customers, right? So I've been at RevenueCat like 3.5 years now. And when I came in, one of the first things I did was I went to the sales team and I told them like, okay, tell me what your biggest problem is and I'm going to try and fix it. They said, well, we get into these conversations with big apps because like the product team wants something and then there's a developer in the corner just like shaking their head going, no, we'll do that ourselves. That's actually the position we were in like 3.5 years ago. And we went on like a pretty deliberate hearts and minds campaign. Because if you trace back, if you check the calendars, you'll see that around that time, we started sponsoring and going to every single mobile development event, pretty much anywhere in the world. Like from doing 1 or 2 a year, we went to doing 30. And that's not because conferences and events are a great place to like pitch your stuff, but it's a very, very, very good place to learn a ton about who you're doing it for. And that's just going to make you better at whatever your job in the org is, right? Like actually everybody should do that inside your company. It's going to help you understand those people more. And it's going to build a ton of like trust, visibility, and it kind of humanizes you, which helps, right? Like when people know that you're not just a tool, you're a bunch of like real human people because you've seen them there and you've seen them there and you've seen them there. And what we started doing pretty much immediately is talk at conferences, not about what RevenueCat does as a product, but about how we build RevenueCat.
Mm.
Because if I'm considering, like, should I do this myself or going to let somebody else do it? Right? I'm considering, am I building, I'm going to build infrastructure or build a tool or whatever. Am I going to do this myself or going to trust somebody else? Having faith in that other party's capabilities goes a long way. So then going up on stage and saying, okay, well, this is how we built that. This is how it works, right? That's a great way to instill trust. So yeah, just, it's not even unique to developer tools, right? Just like go to where your customer is and meet as many of them as possible. And for developers, I think there's this history of events and meetups and communities that you can just go out and find and become a part of, and that helps.
It's building the understanding and then building like technical credibility, I guess. Would you say those are...
Yeah. And then, so a very good example, and it doesn't work as well everywhere as it does there, but whenever I'm at a new company, I grab a bunch of people and we go to Japan. And that's because Japan's very cool, right? It's just like a place you want to hang out. But also, Japan is a huge market, and people generally don't touch Japan as a market until very, very late because they think it's difficult and people speak another language and whatever. Actually, in developer tooling and developers there, English actually goes quite a long way. But if you go to Tokyo and then you pull up ConPass, ConPass, it's like a Japanese meetup.com for engineering meetups. And then there are going to be like 10 or 12 or 20 every single day of the week in Tokyo. And then you could just go from meetup to meetup to meetup to meetup to meetup to meetup. And they're going to be super happy to have somebody like from abroad come over and do a talk and share what they've built and whatever. Maybe you buy the pizza or the beer for the meetup. And that's where you get like your first couple of ambassadors or advocates. And we're doing that with RevenueCat. It worked amazingly for Bitrise. But for Bitrise, we got a tiny little bit lucky where one of the first times we went there, one of the people that was using Bitrise then got hired, or now founded one of Japan's biggest startup successes ever. So then that entire company was using Bitrise. It's a very like meetup heavy culture. So their engineers would go to meetups and tell other engineers about the product. And then there were more, and then there were more. And then it just kind of turned into our number 2 market in the world in the span of months. Yeah.
Wow. It's incredible.
But like the power of just like going and visiting your customers wherever they are, it's like, sounds super simple, but yeah, that works.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. And what do you say to the kind of like, I know some people are like kind of against like, say, conferences, like, oh, it's not worth it, this sort of thing. Like, you know, you do get some return, but it's like very expensive, takes a lot of time, like sort of stuff like that.
It depends on how you do them, right? So now we make, our brand is a bit quirky, right? By design. So we make a deliberate effort to have the biggest, weirdest booth wherever we go.
I'm gonna need an example.
Oh, so I'll send you a clip. But at one conference, we had a human claw machine. So we make these RevenueCat plushies. So we had like a huge like kiddie pool type thing filled with plushies, and then somebody would get into a harness, and then there's like a little joystick, and then they got elevated and then sent down to like grab a plushie. So we did that. We had somebody from the cast of Cats in like dressed as a cat in a fortune teller booth lay fortunes, but then the fortunes were all like cat cards that we made. Yeah, so we do.
That is weird.
We,
Sorry, quirky, I should say.
yeah. But then the thing is, like, because those conferences are smaller, they're like, I'm not going to Dreamforge or whatever. Like, these are not 100,000 person conferences. So doing a booth well is also not $1 million, right?
Yeah. These are
we
like
did that.
mobile.
Yeah.
These would be like iOS dev conferences or something like that.
Yeah. But then even it's not about having the giant booth, right? We do that now because like it's just part of what we do. We like to, like, our ethos when we decide on like events or marketing stuff, we do two things. We do things that help developers make more money because that's the mission, right? So if we logically think that something will help a developer make more money, we will do it. Doesn't matter if it actually moves the needle in terms of marketing, because if you consistently do the thing that your customer cares about most, you just built a tremendous amount of trust, right? It's like, oh, you care about the exact same thing I care about. So we do things that help developers make more money, and we do things we think are funny. It's those two things, right? And then sometimes they can be both at the same time, like perfect, but it has to be one of those two. And yeah, the booth is more because we think it's funny than anything else. It's really about talking to as many customers as possible. And you don't need a crazy booth to do that, right? You can just go a place. You can shake a bunch of hands. The thing I always do and did even before we had like booth money is pick the most interesting and relevant talks and just be in the front row. Just ask questions, walk up to people at the end of it, just like have a conversation. That's where the money is, right? It's in those conversations.
Who goes to the conferences typically?
Everybody inside the company. There's a Notion page that lists every conference that we're doing throughout the year, and then there's a column available to go, and everybody in the company just like fills their name in for a bunch of stuff. So if you go to like an iOS conference, you might have somebody from our people team at the booth, or like a marketing person or a product person or an engineer, right? They also go to all the things.
Wow. Finance? Do finance get to go?
Yeah, but everybody goes. So,
That's awesome.
and it's again, like, it's a little bit of a playbook thing because I did the same thing at Bitrise. At Bitrise, the trick was that I would bring our head of legal, Tim, which is like, Tim is amazing. Super nice guy. He's also like a 60-year-old man with glasses who is obviously a lawyer, right? And I would have him demo Bitrise at the booth, right? So my trick would be I'd ask somebody like, what do you use for like mobile CI/CD? And somebody would say Jenkins because everybody says Jenkins. And I'd be like, oh, how long does that take you? And they'd be like, oh, hours, days. And I'd be like, okay, this is Tim. He's our head of legal. He's not going to set up Bitrise. And then Tim would set up Bitrise, right? And that's a good gag.
Yeah.
But the actual value is in the fact that Tim had a very, very good understanding of what we did and who we did it for. So that when Tim has to like sign a check for something, he knows what it's for. Like, the context helps everyone.
Yeah.
That's the value. That's part of the value. That's also the message that everybody that visits your booth is going to get. It's like, oh, so everybody in the company cares about this, right? Everybody in the company cares about this. Yeah, you can probably pick a random person in any part of RevenueCat, and they're going to know a little bit of mobile dev, and they're going to know a little bit of mobile growth just by virtue of having that much exposure to customers.
Yeah, this is actually, it's really cool approach. I guess it sounds like it's not quite simple, but I don't know that many people that are doing this. It's really cool.
It's not, it's super, like, just spin up a Notion page. Like, it's, again, it was like a day one thing at RevenueCat was like, cool, we're just all going to go to conferences now. And because we're fully remote, it also helps people meet each other in person, right? Because like most people, you just see each other over Zoom. So you see the people you work with, you get really close to other teams because you're not going to be at a conference with just developers. You're not going to be at a conference with just the finance people. You're going to like build these kind of relationships that also just make collaboration better.
Yeah. That makes sense. Like I've seen like some kind of someone was writing, I think it was Keith Casey was writing about like DevRel. I might be calling out Keith that didn't write this, but I think it was like saying one of the things was like a lot of the time you have in companies like the DevRels will get to go to like fly all around the world, go to all the conferences, while like someone in the engineering team would like dream to go to like a conference once a year, but they don't get to go, and then it's like kind of creates like kind of a weird vibe as well. Where
and there's like I'm looking up the picture because we have Flutter Kaigi is happening. Like there's a Flutter, so the mobile technology conference in Tokyo, and who is there? Actually, one developer advocate is there because we do have developer advocates. This is just not like just their job. There's a developer advocate. There's somebody from support. There is a product manager. There's just like an assortment of RevenueCats at that conference now.
RevenueCats. That's what you call it? Call yourselves?
Yeah, every once in a while.
Okay, that's amazing. Okay, Rik, so where can people go? I mean, they can go to the article, but like, can they reach out to you if they're interested in joining you?
Yeah, they can definitely reach out to me. I have to like check the URL to make sure it works. RevenueCat.com/jobs, because hiring for sales, hiring for marketing, we're hiring a ton of engineers. The DevX team is really, really cool. The developer experience team, product and design, tons of jobs open because having 20% of App Store revenue flow through RevenueCat is fun. But what is way better than 20% is 100%. And it's going to take a lot of people to make that 100% a reality. So that sounds appealing. Then, know where to find us.
Amazing. And where can people find you, Rik?
On Twitter mostly. It's H. So my handle.
RIK is significantly easier.
Yeah, it's HHAANDR. So my last name is Haandrikman, which don't even try to pronounce it. And my first name is like officially it's Hendrik. So it's H Haandr from the last name. Just like if you search for RevenueCat, I'm gonna pop up in a lot of the conversations. Oh, we didn't even talk about that. But like the entire company is on Twitter talking to developers day in, day out. Like we have a channel set up so that we know that when somebody talks about RevenueCat, somebody inside the company is going to jump on it.
That's awesome. Which tool do you use for that?
I think we actually built something.
Oh.
I think we built something. Maybe one day it'll break, and then it'll be like a very compelling event for us to buy something. We do so I think maybe Jacob talked about this when he was on, but we just like follow every single person that talks about RevenueCat, like follow them. And then what happens is that over time, your entire feed is customers. So that when you go to Twitter/X, then you're just going to see people that you do the job for. And again, it helps. It just helps build understanding.
You're not wasting time. You're doing your job at that point. When you're on Twitter liking people's memes and stuff.
That's very much
it's your customers' memes.
That's very much how I try to think about it.
Rik, amazing. Thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it. Short notice as well. So thank you.
Yeah, you're super welcome. This was fun.
Thanks everyone for listening.